Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. We have a very special fast news for you tonight. This is the longest script we have had in a while, probably since we started diving into Danny Masterson. So we're going to get into it. We're going to let some people get in. I'm actually going to put my headphones on. I know my sound levels are good. It makes me feel better to have my headphones on, even though I know my sound levels are good. I don't know why. So let's get into it. Again,
This
I
is
hope.
the longest script we've had in a while.
I'm so sorry about that. All right. So, yep. I'm going to pull up my script. I might not be as responsive to comments as I usually am, but I will do my best. Like I said, this is a little bit of a longer script. I did want to talk about the new Supreme Court hearing out of New York, about New York, but I'm only on page 10. It's about 33 pages long, so I could not accurately use that in this story. So that will be covered tomorrow. So let's get into this. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight we will be talking about two previous pandemics in the United States, the yellow fever outbreak of 1793, and more recently, the misleadingly named Spanish flu of 1918. Before we get into all that, though, we're going to talk about Jacobson versus Massachusetts. Jacobson versus Massachusetts was a Supreme Court case in 1905 and is often regarded as the most important judicial decision in public health by legal experts. It was decided just a few years after a major smallpox outbreak in Boston that resulted in 1,596 cases and 217 deaths between 1901 and 1903. The outbreak reignited the smallpox immunization debate in the country, and there was plenty of over-exaggeration on both sides. Anti-vaccinationists launched an attack saying the compulsory vaccination is the greatest crime of the age. It slaughters tens of thousands of innocent children, and it is more important than the slavery question because it is debilitating the whole human race, said Porter Cope in a speech in July 29th, 1905. The New York Times in 1885, in an 1885 editorial, called the debate a conflict between intelligence and ignorance, civilization and barbarianism. The paper later, in August of 1898, referred to the anti-vaccinationist as a familiar species of crank, whose arguments are absurdly fallacious. Before Jacobson, the state courts were constantly weighing in on the vaccination controversy. The courts routinely found school vaccination requirements to be constitutional, like in Abel v. Clark in 1890 in California, and again in Connecticut in 1894 in the Bissell v. Davidson case. In Indiana in 1900, Blue v. Beach determined a person's bona fide belief against vaccination was not a sufficient excuse for noncompliance. However, a person could be exempt because of a physical condition that posed a particular risk for adverse effects. Jacobson was the first case to go to the Supreme Court on the issue of vaccination. Now, a little background on the case. Massachusetts was one of 11 states at the time that had compulsory vaccination laws. Massachusetts law empowered the Board of Health of the cities and towns in the state to enforce mandatory free vaccinations for adults over the age of 21 if the city or township determined it was necessary for the public health or safety of the community. Adults who refused were subject to a $5 fine, which is equivalent to $93.79 today. In 1902, faced with an outbreak of smallpox, the Board of Health of the city of Cambridge in Massachusetts adopted a regulation ordering the vaccination or revaccination of all residents, whereas Hennings Jacobson, who was a pastor, lived. Jacobson was from Sweden, and he was given the smallpox vaccine as a kid, oddly enough. While successful of getting rid of smallpox mostly in Sweden, Jacobson said the vaccine went badly for him and left him with a lifelong horror of the practice. So not surprisingly, he refused the vaccine. Because of his refusal to get vaccinated, Jacobson was prosecuted and indeed fined $5. Jacobson argued that subjecting him to a fine or imprisonment for neglecting or refusing vaccination was an invasion of his liberty. The law was an unreasonable, arbitrary, and oppressive, he said. And one should not be subject to the law if he or she objects to vaccination, no matter the reason. Jacobson argued it violated his 14th Amendment rights. Justice John Marshall Harlan delivered the decision on the 7-2 majority that Massachusetts law did not, in fact, violate the 14th Amendment. The court stated that in every well-ordered society, charged with the duty of conserving the safety of its members, the rights of the individuals in respect of his liberties may at times, under the pressure of great dangers, be subject to such restraint, to be enforced by reasonable regulations as the safety of the general public may demand. Furthermore, the court held that mandatory vaccinations are not arbitrary or oppressive so long as they do not go far beyond what was reasonably required for the safety of the public. In Massachusetts, with smallpox being prevalent and increasing in Cambridge, the regulation in question was necessary in order to protect public health and secure the public safety. The court said that Jacobson offered proof that there were many in the medical community who believed the smallpox vaccine would not stop the spread of the disease, and in fact, cause other diseases in the body. However, the opinions offered by Jacobson were more formidable by their numbers, by their inherent value. And what everybody knows is opposite. The theory accords with the common belief and is maintained by high medical authority. Lastly, the court acknowledged that in some extreme cases, for certain people in particular conditions of health, the requirement of vaccination would be cruel and inhumane, in which case courts would be able to interfere in order to prevent wrongdoing and oppression. With that said, the statute in question was not intended to be applied to such case, and Jacobson did not offer to prove that. By reason of this condition, he was in fact not fit for subject to vaccination. All right, so we will cycle back to this later. I'm going to get a drink of water, then we're going to get into the Spanish flu. So I have a brief history of the Spanish flu by the CDC before we dive into it, because I thought the CDC summarized this very well, and I want you guys to hear what the CDC had to say about the Spanish flu. The 1918 influenza pandemic was the most severe pandemic in recent history. It was caused by an H1N1 virus with genes of avian origin. Although there is not universal consequences regarding the virus origin, it spread worldwide. Consensus regarding the virus origin, I'm sorry about that again. It spread worldwide during 1918 and 1919 in the United States. It was first identified in military personnel in the spring of 1918. It is estimated that about 500 million, or 1/3 of the world's population, became infected with the virus. The number of deaths was estimated to be at least 50 million worldwide, about 675,000 occurring in the United States. Mortality was high in people younger than 5 years old, 20 to 40, and 65 years and older. The high mortality rate in healthy people, including those 20 to 40 age group, was a unique feature of this pandemic. While the 1918 H1N1 virus has been synthesized and evaluated, the properties that made it so devastating are still not well understood. With no vaccine to protect against influenza infection and no antibiotics to treat secondary bacterial infections that can be associated with influenza infections, control efforts worldwide were limited to non-pharmaceutical interventions such as isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, use of disinfectants, and limitations of public gatherings, which were applied unevenly. Now that that is out of the way, it ends with stating that these restrictions were applied unevenly. That couldn't be more true. Some local governments rolled out initiatives to try to stop the spread. These varied by region and included closing schools and places of entertainment, enforcing no spitting ordinances, encouraging people to use handkerchiefs or disposable tissues, and requiring people to wear masks in public. Mask mandates were most common in the West, but they were not exclusive to the West. The first recorded infection was in the U.S. Army. It was a U.S. Army private stationed at Fort Riley in Kansas, and it was recorded on March 4th of 1918. Because this was the middle of World War I, a lot of countries did not actually report the cases. Because of Spain's was a I'm so sorry, guys. Because Spain was neutral, they did report on their cases, and it was then dubbed the Spanish flu. There was an intense campaign pushed by the American Red Cross to convince Americans to wear masks. As one Red Cross PSA put it, the man or woman or child who will not wear a mask is now a dangerous slacker. And that was in 1918. Yet, even though compliance was high, some complained that masks were uncomfortable, ineffective, or bad for business. Officials were caught in public without masks. And after the war, there was no longer a sense that people should wear masks to keep the troops safe. Some people even formed an anti-mask league in San Francisco. Nancy Bristow, who is the chair of the history department at the University of Puget Sound and the author of American Pandemic, The Lost Worlds of the 1918 Influenza Epidemic, said, "You read routinely about people not wanting to wear them because they're hot and stuffy. Some people argue against them because they say they create fear in public and that we want to keep people calm, which I think is really an excuse to critique them because someone does not want to wear them." Cities that passed mask ordinances in the fall of 1918 struggled to enforce them among a small population of people who rebelled. Common punishments at the time were fines, prison sentences, and having your name printed in the newspaper, which were upheld by numerous local and state trials, citing the Jacobson v. Massachusetts Supreme Court case. In one horrific incident in San Francisco, a special officer for the Board of Health shot a man who refused to wear a mask, as well as two other bystanders. However, when public officials ignored guidelines, like when the mayor of San Francisco and a public health officer went to a boxing match without masks, they received a $50 and $5 fine, respectively. But they were never placed under arrest like other violators. Unlike handkerchiefs and paper tissue, which became commonplace, mask wearing did not catch on in the United States after the ordinances ended. It's still hard to say how effective mask wearing on its own was in 1918 and 1919. What is documented is that communities that implemented stronger health measures overall fared better than those that did not. Now, next, we will dive into the yellow fever outbreak. Now, this is a long time ago. This is 1793. All right, yellow fever is different in the sense that it was transmitted by mosquitoes to humans, right? And that was unknown at the time. People were stuck in the capital of Philadelphia. As Baltimore and New York and other cities refused refugees from Philadelphia. The wealthy and the politicians fled the city, including George Washington, who left September 10th for his scheduled vacation. And 8 days later, in the midst of the outbreak in Philadelphia, George Washington laid capital cornerstone, as it is known, establishing Washington, D.C. as the United States capital. The outbreak killed about 1/10 of Philadelphia, or around 5,000 people. Freed African-American slaves were enlisted as nurses and caregivers for the sick. They also dug graves for the bodies of the dead. While the rich and powerful fled, the poor and the freed slaves were left to suffer. The panic was so high, as soon as someone who fell ill, oftentimes families would cast them into the streets. In November, as it grew cold and the mosquitoes died off, the yellow fever outbreak came to an end, leaving 5,000 dead. So how does all of this this exactly relate? Well, as I noted earlier during the Spanish flu, Jacobson versus Massachusetts was referred to on court cases, including mask mandates in San Francisco and other cities. Recently, in Cross Culture Christian Center versus Newsom, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, a pastor and a Christian center sued California Governor Gavin Newsom. Wow. The California city of Lodi, its police chief, and other government officials alleging that stay-at-home executive orders imprisonably infringe on their constitutional right to speak, assemble, and practice religion as they choose. So in that case, they sided with California and Gavin Newsom. However, in First Baptist Church versus Kelly, it was different. The district court for Kansas issued a TRO preventing the enforcement of the executive stay-at-home order against various churches. Although the order restricted the number of secular activities, the court found that the order expressly purported to restrict in-person religious assembly by more than 10 congregants. The court determined that the law is inconclusive and thus not generally applicable when it fails to prohibit secular activity that prohibits religious conduct. In granting the TRO, the district court did not order the plaintiff churches. It did, however, order the plaintiff churches that they would have to comply with various social distancing and sanitation guidelines. Now, in regards to 1793, it shows what can happen if nothing is done to contain a virus. While I understand the difference in transmission, the fact of the matter is the rich and the powerful would still be able to leave, leaving the middle class and the poor to fend for themselves. COVID has been hard on everybody, guys. It has. It's been hard on me. It's been hard on business owners. I have friends that own businesses. It's been hard on all of us. And I feel so horrible for everyone affected. And we need to find a way to work together. All right. I feel Americans through history have come together in the darkest of times. I tried to come at the story, guys. I hope you understand from a legal and historical standpoint. I really try to leave personal opinions out of this stuff. As we know, the Constitution outlines our freedoms and how our government operates, guys. It's up to a neutral court to decide the interpretations of the Constitution and those laws. We will not always agree with what is done and what the court decides, but this is how the system works, for better or for worse. Guys, I know this has been tough. I know this has been tough on everybody. It's been tough for our mental health, our pocketbooks. And while billionaires seem to be capitalizing off of this, like Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos and all that, while they seem to be capitalizing all of this, all of us everyday people are being forgotten. And it's been tough. And this isn't the first time in history something like this has happened. These aren't the first times we had these arguments, and they probably won't be the last. And that's just the fact of the matter. The reality is, not all of us are going to agree. We're all going to have different opinions. But we have to be able to look back on these events through history and understand this is how it works. We cannot go around yelling falsehoods and assuming stuff. You have to look at precedents set through history, and it's up to the courts to interpret the Constitution. Guys, that is what I have for you today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will see you guys tomorrow. I have a big update. I am reading the new Supreme Court decision that happened, as you guys all know. I'm only on page 10, which is why it was not in this piece, because I could not cover the whole thing. I will talk about it a little bit tomorrow. And I have a lot of other news stories to get to tomorrow as well, since today really wasn't a news day. It was more of a history lesson. You guys have a great rest of your night. I love all of you. And guys, I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. Seriously, I have some of the best supporters ever, Facebook and YouTube and all of you. I love all of you.